Our group was instructed to research bed sharing during infancy. Being tasked to research the article, "Is Bed Sharing Beneficial and Safe During Infancy? A Systematic Review," by Rashmi Ranjan Das, M. Jiva Sankar, and Ramesh Argawal. The topic of this article was bed sharing during infancy, explaining the purpose of co-sleeping, the benefits of mother and child bed sharing, and the negative health impacts inflicted by bed sharing. The article first started by explaining the history of the mother and child sleeping together, doing so by introducing the term rooming in, which means keeping the mother and the baby in the same room. This concept was originally introduced after discovering that the separation of the mother and infant at an early age could negatively impact the emotional and psychological development of both the mother and infant. After realizing this, the concept bed sharing was created, which is the newborn being kept on the same bed as the mother. This concept seemed to solve the problems caused by early separation. It also was utilized in order to improve the efficiency of breastfeeding. Co-sleeping has made it easier for mothers to breastfeed, which is another reason why mothers choose to sleep with their infants. However, it did invite a new conflict about the risks that come with doing so, particularly the concern that bed sharing was causing SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome, which is when an infant passes away unexpectedly in their sleep for unknown reasons. The correlation between the two isn't completely understood because there isn't any scientific evidence that proves this to be true, except for in correlation with smoking mothers. This led to a study to further understand how they relate with one another. One thing considered to be an impact were the different cultures, because in some cultures it was determined that co-sleeping and SIDS were more common than others. However, more commonly the cultures they were referring were the factors implicated by the mother, such as substances like smoking, alcohol, and drugs. It seemed that there's an argument on which method is more destructive, if risking the emotional and psychological development of the child and mother is worth the risk that bed sharing could cause SIDS. Because of the uncertainty regarding the subject, this was researched and studied to discover whether or not there was any correlation between co-sleeping causing SIDS. The article discussed the methods involved in researching this correlation, discussing the different approaches taken to study bed sharing, explaining how the research was conducted to support the study. Some example of these types of studies, exposure of mothers and babies to bed sharing, they measured the primary outcome of babies being breastfed and infants dying of SIDS, researching the topic in correlation with each other, more specific research that targeted and separated articles by topic, and then they sorted through the methodology and quality of the selected studies. Some of the large amount of studies done on this topic, that it was imperative to get more in-depth in order to get the best results and relate the most and better supported the study. The results discovered in this research found 21 articles that were useful for the specific study. Most of these studies provided data for a quantitative analysis. None of these studies were randomized. Since all of these studies were observational, the quality of evidence was considered low. After the analysis of this research, it was discovered that bed sharing doesn't affect the SIDS risk. In conclusion, bed sharing is a topic of common interest in regard to its controversial association with SIDS, one hand, and on the other, breastfeeding. Breastfeeding was determined to be the main reason for bed sharing. Overall, it was determined that there isn't very significant evidence that suggests that co-sleeping causes SIDS. The article concluded that more detailed studies that look at bed sharing, breastfeeding, and hazardous circumstances that put babies at risk. While researching bed sharing during infancy, we discovered another article that discussed this topic in order to find another perspective regarding the topic. We discovered the article Bed Sharing and the Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, written by Hilary Klonhoff Cohen and Sharon L. Eldenstein. There were several things also taken into consideration of who could participate in this study. Infants that were born with health disorders were not eligible to participate in the study. The interviews were 45 to 60 minutes long and took place over the phone. These interviews discussed the information regarding demographic information, obstetric history, information on labor and delivery, neonatal characteristics, parental lifestyle, family history of disease, and circumstances of death for cases. The case study discussed in this article recorded the information that was discovered during the interviews. During these interviews, questions about the sleeping arrangement, sleep positions, feeding history, birth weight, medical conditions, race and parent involvement were all discussed. All this information was needed in order to discover the similarities and differences between the cases and controls. These questions help the scientists better understand whether or not co-sleeping really does cause SIDS. The reason for all the questions was to obtain a better understanding of the recorded results. This also helped the researchers differentiate between when it was more common for co-sleeping to take place. While in some circumstances it is more common for co-sleeping to take place in certain cultures, what was discovered is that in some cultures co-sleeping is more common, but SIDS isn't. Some examples of the result that came from the study are infants that had died had significantly lower birth weights than those of the control group babies. More parents of healthy infants were married or living together than parents of infants who died. Apparently, mothers that slept with their children were less educated than those who slept apart. It was also observed that African American families were more likely to bed share during both day and night. The study also discovered that 45 of the infants that passed away were sharing a bed with their parents or babysitter. The study also discovered that bed sharing with parents under the influence also had an impact on frequency of SIDS. The article also acknowledged that there was a potential bias because the Human Subject Committee didn't permit the interviews to take place right after the death, but instead required a waiting period to take into consideration the grieving period. However, the bias was dismissed because bed sharing wasn't the primary hypothesis of the study. In conclusion, the study discovered that there was a weak association between bed sharing and the sudden infant death syndrome. It was concluded that bed sharing was not a major risk factor for the syndrome. It was discovered that more studies need to take place in order to decide whether or not bed sharing does cause SIDS. The study also concluded that SIDS is multifactorial.
Today we are with Heather at Target. We are speaking on the subject of co-sleeping with infants and would like to know your opinion.
I would say no, only because my husband is a firefighter and he has told me stories about sometimes moms or dads roll over. So that's definitely a big issue. I personally never did it because I feel other parents have told me when my daughter was a baby, don't start it, she'll never get out of your bed.
Correct.
So I would advise for two reasons. One, you could roll over. Second, the child will be used to sleeping with you in your bed. And I know some parents do it because women tend to breastfeed. It's just easier to.
Right.
But I have seen on Facebook, they have this little bassinet that attaches to your bed to keep it a little bit closer to you, so you're not really co-sleeping, but
safer.
It's a safer option to do it that way. So that's just my opinion from a mom of a 7-year-old.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Have
You're
a good
welcome.
day. Today we are with
Maria.
and we're speaking on the subject of co-sleeping with infants, and we would like to know your opinion on the matter.
Okay, I think sleeping with your infants is a nice bonding, because my kids recall like they slept on my chest for quite a few months, but I do believe there's an other side to that where, you know, kids could sleep with you and they could possibly be hurt with your hand or your covers over them. I don't find an issue with it, but as they get older, they tend to want to stay in your bed more if they're toddlers. Mine, on the other hand, when they were younger, they started sleeping with me. They never stopped until they were 6 or 7. I had a bed next to me and they wouldn't leave. So it was like, it's good, but it's also very habit forming, and it's hard for them to break that habit when they get older. So I think there's a good with the bonding, but there has to be a line when you stop at a certain age and they have to sleep in their own room. I mean, that's just how I feel. But I think it is good bonding in the beginning, but you have to have a fine line of when you stop it. So it just depends. So
Okay. Thank you.
Good morning. Today is February 22nd of 2022, and we are at Indian River State College's main campus, and today I am with
Kira.
So the subject we are going to be speaking about is if parents should be co-sleeping with their infants. So what do you think about that subject?
I think it's okay. I definitely think there is some fear around the safety of the baby, but for the most part, I think it is easier for the parents if the child is there. You can feed them easier. The mother can breastfeed if she is breastfeeding, and you also get that like connection between like the parents and the baby.
Okay, so today I'm here with.
Azam.
So the subject we have been discussing is if parents should be co-sleeping with their infants. What is your opinion on that? Could you list like a pro and a con?
The pro is you develop a better relationship with your child. The con is you can possibly kill them because you fall asleep and roll over onto them.